Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Hack Your Thoughts, the journey to self love. We are now at episode 44, and I'm so grateful you're here. A few weeks ago, we launched our series, The Hidden Ways We Shrink Ourselves. And it's been eye opening to uncover just how often we unconsciously make ourselves smaller, playing it safe, dimming our light, taking the spotlight off us, or just holding back when we should really be standing tall. In the last episode, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, we explored some ways we minimize ourselves, whether it's rooms where we belong, or conversations that need our voices, or even in our own self perception. But here's the thing, shrinking isn't always obvious, it kind of sneaks in quietly. This week, I'm reminded of times when I couldn't speak up. I didn't have the courage, when I felt less than, when I had shrunk. I was conditioned for years and years from being told, you're not good enough or you don't know what you're talking about. So, what happened? I took up less space, which means I allowed others to take up more space. More than that, I allowed others to take up my space until I disappeared. And it was like I had a fight going on inside my mind. There was always two choices: you accept this, or you begin to create another story, create my own story. And that's what I'm doing today. That's what I'm doing with my life, creating my story. Sometimes it's tough. Sometimes I want to shrink, but I have to just, muscle up and bring myself forward. Now, some of you may hear this and be totally disregard and say, hey, Chloe, you're talking nonsense. But there is you. And this message is for you. Take up your space. Choose to stand tall physically, emotionally, mentally. And it's a daily practice, not a one-time decision. That's why today's episode is so important. And we're going to be diving in to this topic, why we shrink ourselves and how to make it stop. And I couldn't think of a better person to explore this with me than an exceptional friend and executive coach that I've collaborated with extensively, Kevin Johnson, fondly known as KJ. You'll be meeting him in a moment. Here's what we're going to be exploring. Why do we unconsciously shrink ourselves? How do we disappear without realizing it? What are root causes and conditioning, and where does this show up in our lives? And how can we start to recognize and reverse that? Don't go away, stay right there, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back. It's episode 44, and we're talking about why we shrink ourselves and how to make it stop. I'm excited to have my dear friend, dear trusted friend, and coaching colleague with me today. KJ is one wise soul whose words kind of drop on your lap, in your ear, through your gut, inside your heart, and on your tongue like butter that kind of causes a shift that kind of rocks your world and assumptions with gentle waves. And that's how I experience him every time we together. So, KJ, welcome.
Thank you, Chloe. I appreciate being introduced. Like he's like butter.
Of course, you are like butter. Think about butter, I'm going to be honest, recently, or I'm going to say in the past maybe 2 years, the butter that I've been having is called Benacol, and it helps to lower cholesterol. It really works wonders. Um, Delicious. And I've grown so accustomed to it, so that's butter for me. So you know what, you like Benacol for me. How's that?
I'll take it. I'll take it.
It's a cholesterol lowering
Yes.
butter, plant based. Okay, so thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for just your time and for being here. I can't wait to hear your wisdom and what you have to share with us.
Thanks for having me, Chloe.
So you worked with so many people, but before we go in there, why don't you just share a little bit about yourself with everybody, just so
Oh,
that
well,
you know who you are.
yeah, I've, as Chloe said, we've been collaborating for quite a while now. Probably what, the last 10 years,
Oh,
almost. Is it almost 10 years? Somewhere in that range.
probably, yeah.
And my work is in developing the whole human who just happens to be a leader. And in that kind of work, I focus a lot on the inner condition. Otto Scharmer talks about this. I don't know if he coined the phrase, but he talked about you can't change the condition of the outer circumstances without changing the inner condition of the soul. And my work really lands there, that I help folks identify their inner condition, name it, and start making shifts in terms of their own self leadership, but also how they lead others, how they influence their community or their organization. So it begins to ripple out from them as they change themselves, as opposed to trying to change through policy or through some external effort, which is exhausting, which leads to burnout, which leads to people, quitting and being frustrated. But it doesn't have to be that way, and
Hmm.
so that's the joy of my work.
Hmm. That's wonderful. I love that concept of inner condition. We should have a conversation about that
I'm
offline
sure we will.
because I'm bursting to go there. But anyway, let's stick to the script. Okay, so I know that you worked with so many leaders and people globally. What are some of the most common ways people shrink themselves without even realizing it?
Well, I mean, well, where do we start? I mean, it's been about 26 years of me working in the coaching space, and this is really the reason why most people come to me in the first place. And it's I can't seem to have my voice heard, or I can't seem to get my point across, or I can't seem to make change effectively. And it happens in such subtle, nefarious ways. It's like, eh, you know, we're wired to respond to threatening situations. And new situations tend to always feel like a threat, even if they aren't necessarily threatening. So what do? The four things, right? We fight, we fly, we freeze, and we fawn. And I think fawning is effectively shrinking. It's making ourselves as small as possible, making ourselves appear to be acquiescent, appear to agree, appear to be agreeable, appear to be likable at the expense of the voice that we have, at the expense of the contribution we might make, at the expense of the changes we might implement if we actually showed up in our full size. So it's like, we fold ourselves in these little origami, cranes, and expect people to be impressed by our folding, but we aren't actually doing anything with the substance that we are.
Mhm.
So it happens in very subtle ways. And, the obvious ways are, staying silent in a meeting, or um, hiding in terms of not sharing your full volume
Mhm.
of potential or skill. But it's so much more subtle and nefarious than that. It's
Mhm.
often ways in which we accept a job somewhere where we know our voice may not actually be heard.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
we take a promotion, we know the context that we're being promoted into, and we take that knowing that our voice isn't really wanted there.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
there are things that we contribute to
Mhm.
being small and shrinking that come before even the shrinking act. We shrink
Mhm.
when we make decisions about
Mhm.
context that we put ourselves in. And I
Mhm.
feel like those are the little moments that we miss, that we then regret, and we end up shrinking because we don't have any other choice.
You know, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, a moment ago. We are always at a place of a decision, a choice that we have to make.
Yep.
We can choose to have our voice heard or not have it heard. or say something. Um, Earlier, you also spoke about agreeable and likable. When you said that, I'm like, yeah, agreeable. When we agreeable, we're stepping outside of our authenticity, of
Yeah,
who we truly are. We become someone else just to please,
exactly.
to
Exactly.
fit in, to belong, because we just want to belong. We,
Hmm.
even the likability factor.
But even in that wanting to belong, that agreeable response is an act of self betrayal,
Mm,
which then leads to a cycle of shrinking again,
yeah,
because it creates a self thought of I'm not worthy.
yeah,
I couldn't stand up in that moment. So what makes me think I can stand up in the next
mhm,
moment and the next moment and the next moment? Until
yeah,
we break that cycle, the self betrayal is an internalized force multiplier.
yeah,
And you just get smaller and smaller and smaller.
yeah,
And it's all in your own head. No one else outside has to even know what's going on there.
mhm, yeah. Yeah. So, have you ever caught yourself holding back, whether in your posture, your tone, your words, what you choose, what's really going on in your mind in that moment?
Well, it's interesting because this question has many layers to it, depending on who you are in a particular society, in a culture, in a work environment. Uh, as a black man, there's been many moments when I've shrunk out of a sense of real survival, a sense of real fear and concern about how I can be myself fully. Um, and then there have been environments where it maybe wasn't as life threatening, where I still found myself shrinking for concerns about livelihood, concerns about, will I be able to have my reputation after I say what I have to say, even if I'm really honest, even if what I see is legit. Sometimes it's risky to say what I really see in certain environments. So that's a tough question to answer broadly, because
Mm,
it's going to depend on the context in which you are moving and the level of privilege you have within that context. So
mhm,
the level of privilege is key, because if if I'm a person who is in a dominant culture in an environment, I'm going to be able to say pretty much anything I want to say, and it'll find a way to be written off as, oh well, even if it's inappropriate, there'll be a way to be written off.
mhm,
But if I'm coming from a not so dominant or intentionally excluded community, that's going to be a harder thing for me to presence myself,
mhm,
and the survival tendency is going to be higher in that environment too. So it's tougher. Like, I'm like, am I going to upset the balance of power in this room?
mm,
Am I going
yeah,
to rock the boat? Am I going to make waves? I mean, I think those are things that go through our minds because we're thinking about the impact. But I want to suggest this, and I don't mean to jump ahead to solutions, but the data is powerful there. So if we take the information that we are afraid to say something, there's an intentional reversal that we can make in that moment that says the resistance that I have to saying this is proof that it needs to be said.
mhm,
And so there's a way to counter it. And we'll go into that a little bit later because I know you have
mhm,
some other questions for me. But
mhm,
I think there's power in recognizing the resistance,
mhm, yeah,
even if you do yield to it. Recognize the resistance, because there's something to it that the next time you get a chance to say that thing, there may be a great opportunity for you to say it in a way that's very strategic and impactful.
yeah. And I would love to go deeper in that because right there we can stay, Uh, and let me say this before we move on. When we can recognize the resistance, but how often are we recognized because we're so steeped in our limiting beliefs, in the way we think, in our structured frame, in the framework of our minds, that we stuck. We don't even recognize that we are in resistance. We just resist.
Yep. Yep.
So being able to break down that resistance to say, okay, what does resistance look like? When I'm resisting, what am I doing? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? How am I coming across? What is the impact that I'm having? So deconstructing that
Yeah.
is what
Yeah.
we need to do.
Well, and that I use a simple model. This is not my original model. This is actually Dr. Stephen Cartman's model called the drama triangle. I found that if I look at the three roles that are played in the thing called the drama triangle, it is the very source of resistance. And I'll just go through them very briefly.
Yeah.
The first role in the drama triangle is that of persecutor, someone who's blaming, shaming, trying to find fault in whatever's going on. It's avoiding something. It's avoiding the responsibility of I am responsible for making this happen. So, but I didn't, so I'm going to blame somebody. The second role is that of the victim. That person says, I don't have any power to change this. I don't have any authority. I'm not a
Mm,
leader. I don't have the resources or the tools or the staff to do this project. But they're missing the responsible act of asking for help. They're missing the responsible act of seeking out guidance or direction. The third element in this trifecta of avoidance and drama and resistance is that of the rescuer.
mm,
Now, this is the person who thinks it's their job to save everybody else. So they save the victim by saying, oh, look at them. They don't have what they need. I'm going to give them what I need. But what about your responsibility?
mm,
You could offer that same insight as a coach instead
mm,
of jumping in and trying to enable somebody else who's acting in
mm,
lack of power.
mm,
You could also rescue the persecutor by saying, "Oh, they're under a lot of stress. They're just having a tough time. Don't take it personally, letting them off the hook." But also the rescuer is also avoiding their own responsibilities
mm.
by taking on someone else's to try to
Yeah.
save the victim or justify the persecutor.
Mm,
That resistance is all rotating around what is there for me to do
mm.
right now.
Yeah.
And if I shed those roles, if I say I'm not going to be the person who blames, I'm not going to be the person who acts powerless, I'm not going to be the person who rescues, I'm going to do what's mine to do, then the resistance is gone. It's broken.
Mm,
But you got
yeah.
to recognize you're in one of those roles to be able to extract yourself from them.
Yeah. And how often are we actually recognizing that? We're
Well,
not.
it
We
takes somebody to tell us, honestly.
exactly.
It takes this
Exactly.
podcast. It takes
Yeah.
hearing somebody say,
Mm,
"Hey, you might be acting like a victim if you're doing these five things." All of a sudden, you're like, "Hey, I do one of those things. I wonder if I'm doing that." And
mm,
so it takes a bit of external, which is why I feel like self-help is not really a thing. It's like we need to hear from other people how we are showing up in
mm,
order to fully see ourselves.
yeah.
So it takes somebody. It takes our podcast. It takes
Mhm,
it takes the coaches to be able to say, "Hey, have
yeah.
you noticed this about how you show up in this environment?"
Mm,
That's
yeah.
how we find out.
Yeah. And in the drama circle, yes to everything you're saying. In the drama circle, um, unless you are objective, you cannot see where you are.
Yeah,
Being able to have a mindset of objectivity, in other words, stepping away from the situation and looking at it in second or third person, looking at it as though that this is happening to Chloe. How is Chloe responding? If I have a conversation like that, but then I'm skilled, you are skilled to do that. And
hmm
you're right, being able to learn and to pass the message along, you know, that's our
yeah,
legacy on this earth.
yeah, yeah. I
KJ.
have a dear colleague who teaches the idea of being on your own balcony.
Yeah.
Watch your leadership in action. Pay attention to how you are doing something
Yeah.
in the moment. It
Hmm.
takes some, it's metacognition. It's you
Yeah.
being like behind you watching. It's like what's the um, I can't remember the name of the Marvel comic, but there's this character who's kind of inside another being, and he steps out and he kind of looks behind him and says, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that?" And
Yeah.
I think there's that part of us that wants to be able to see ourselves clearly, and it's a practice. It's a
Yeah.
practice to notice yourself, to
Mm,
catch yourself in the moment of
yeah.
doing something that you may not notice that you're doing on habit, but like if I were to tell you that you say a lot, which I don't think you do, if I tell you I think I hear you say a lot, it's pretty amazing how quickly you will start to notice, oh wow, I just said. It just takes one person to point out something to you, and all of a sudden our subconscious starts looking for it
Mm.
because it's a threat.
Yeah, exactly.
And as soon as we identify a threat, we start looking for it.
Yeah.
So noticing those little moments, like, am I acting like a victim? I don't think I'm acting like a victim. And then you start looking. Your subconscious goes to work. The next
Yes.
time
Yeah.
you act like a victim, your subconscious goes, "Hey, don't look now, but that was a victimy moment right there."
And sometimes we don't want to admit it. We know it, but we don't want to admit it. This is another topic, and I don't want to go there, but I'm going to drop it and move on.
Let's go. Let's
I
go. Keep going.
wonder what would happen when we have our double twin in agentic AI. Will our agentic AI, will our double twin tell us about ourselves? Will that make us better? Or
Well,
will
see,
that tie our hands? And I wonder.
I've been experimenting with this, Chloe. So,
Okay,
and
I
I haven't
told
gone as
you.
far as to create an avatar of myself. I've been thinking about it. I
Right.
seriously have been.
Uh-huh.
But I've been messing around within Chat GPTs, and I've trained it to understand my voice and my language, and I've actually asked it to analyze my videos and tell me what could I do to improve myself. And it's pointed out several really, really poignant things about how my posture, my poise, how I pause, the pace of my voice, my cadence. And it's very insightful. Things that no one has told me about myself. Chat GPT has identified in a series of videos. Just
Well,
so
Chat
it's
GPT is not threatened, or it does.
right. It's
It's
not
like
it's not going to guard me from
courageous
myself.
to say it.
Right. Exactly. It's not my subconscious. It's just data,
Yeah, yeah,
which will not lie. It'll just come
yeah,
back exactly as it's supposed to say it
yeah,
and tell me this is what I see.
yeah,
So I think it's a powerful tool when it's used with intention.
yeah, yeah. So that it just makes you wonder how more aware we could be,
Hmm.
and how we could work on who we are and the way we show up when we're engaging with our double agent.
Well, I'll, just to add, because I know we're trying to move on, but you bring up a good point, and I think it's the reason why ayahuasca has become so popular, and other medicinal tools like that suspend our subconscious protector, because ayahuasca lowers the ego, so that you just see the data, and so it really much mimics the same experience that I have with AI, just giving me raw data. And I'm not afraid of it because the ayahuasca actually lowers that protective edge that would keep
Mm,
me from wanting to see something that I don't want to see.
mm,
And I
yeah,
see it objectively in that moment during the ceremony,
mm,
and I can't unsee it now.
yeah,
So when the ceremony goes away, I still don't have the fear, but I know what I saw, and I'm like, oh wow, that's something I need to address.
mm,
And
wow,
now there's no resistance to it,
mm,
which I think is what the addiction is to
yeah,
ayahuasca, because
yeah,
it has that effect of lowering that. But then there's some responsibility involved in actually addressing what you've seen when you're going through those kinds of ceremony experiences.
hmm, yeah. Okay, well, let's move on because now we kind of, yeah, right. Let's move on.
Yeah,
So
let's go.
why do we hesitate in our uh, um to own our space, even when we know we belong? Fear, conditioning. Why we so boldly and proudly own our small little space?
Well, I think it's a yes and to all the things. It is conditioning. It is fear. It's fear of rejection. It's fear of actually being responsible for what you say. If someone says yes, that's a great idea, now you have to actually follow through on it. So there's some I think deep rooted conditioning that kind of says, be grateful for what you got.
Mm,
Don't think too highly of yourself than you ought to. But I have a different definition of humility, and I think that's what this touches on. And it's that humility is you being exactly who God created you to be, and absolutely nothing less than who God created you to be. Nothing more, nothing less. That's humility to me. So if I'm in my lane, that means I am fully executing the gifts that I have been given. I am out of my lane when I try to be something that I'm not.
Mhm.
When I try to say I'm more than who I actually am, more than my gifts. And I think that is the humility. It's like the sweet spot, the lane, the the slipstream, the flow that allows me to fully exploit everything that I am, not put anybody else down, but
Mm,
also not put myself beneath my potential.
mm,
And to me, that's the thing that we get conditioned away from
mm,
because we've misinterpreted humility as thinking too highly of yourself, which is subjective.
mm.
Who
Yeah,
can think too highly of themselves?
yeah.
That's someone else's projecting upon you that
Yes.
you are thinking too highly of yourself.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's that persecutor thing
Mm.
in play.
Yeah.
I'm going to persecute you because I'm not living into my potential. So I'm going to make you feel like you're outside of your own.
Mhm.
That's that dynamic at play.
A few of the last series, for this series, it's about shrinking, but the last series came from a vision that I had on boundlessness.
Mm,
And I had a vision of myself in my soul. My soul was huge, it was boundless. And I'm inside, and I couldn't understand what is this that usually it's like I'm all of this here, but that's all I can see. There's so much more to me. So, and it's being able to unlock all the hidden treasure that's already inside of us. The hidden treasure is exactly who God created us to be.
yep,
Nothing more and nothing less. That
absolutely.
big circle, that the whole, world where my soul was, that was the shape of my soul, was who God created me to be.
Yeah.
And I feel like, okay, is that much? Because as my mind in a place where I'm stuck, I'm conditioned, and just when I think I've broken through, hey, there's something else waiting to break for me to break through. It's like an ever evolving journey,
Yeah. Yeah.
like finding myself, finding myself, finding myself. That's nothing more, nothing less, finding myself.
And it speaks to I think it's E. E. Cummings that said uh, to be yourself in a world where everyone is trying madly to get you to be someone else is a battle that you should fight and never stop fighting. And a lot of our conditioning is purely societal. Like it's not. I mean, yeah, we could look at our parents. That's our first source of information about who we are and our identity. But they are informed, and then their parents are informed. Who informs all of them? The society that we're in is the former of those opinions and those perspectives.
Totally
And
agree.
we are in a space where homogenization is the demand. We talk about being domesticated. Domestication is basically homogenization of us into a package that is socially acceptable.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's a tough thing to undo the homogenization of our planet.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
starts with that fire in us
Mm,
to vehemently, almost vigorously push back against the resistance to be who we are.
mm. A quick story. I remember when, in a work situation, few companies ago, I was told that I needed to speak up. And I'm like, but that's rude. In my culture, in South Africa, we don't just like interrupt people and just take over. We don't do that. So that's rude. Why would I do? And the person told me, the person I was reporting to said, no, well, to make it work here, you're going to have to do that. And I thought, so become somebody I'm not,
Yeah.
become who I'm not, versus understanding who I am and meeting me where I'm at.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
we keep evolving because others have conditioned us to be who we are.
Yeah.
whether we like that or not, whether that's at work, whether that's in romantic, a lot is in romantic relationships
Mm-hmm.
because that's where we look to someone else for our identity, and we start to be dependent or interdependent. So we start
Yeah.
losing ourselves a lot.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so just one or two questions here, so we can close out. Uh, like, why do we shrink? Some root causes or the conditions, since we're talking about that. Um, I know you talked about society, upbringing, all of that. How do cultural expectations, whether in the workplace, whether in, like we talked about, romantic relations, family dynamics, reinforce this shrinking behavior?
Well, culture is the environment that we seek to thrive in, and we find ourselves in many cultures, layers. Work, neighborhood, city, nation, and the rest of the world. But culture is a construct that we contribute to, and if we lose sight of the fact that we are a part of every system that we're in, and that we have influence on every system that we're in, no matter how granular or no matter how macro, we have power. And the
Mhm.
more of us that realize we have power to influence the systems that we're in, the less we're inclined to shrink. Because
Mm,
as soon as we start to see, like Marianne Williamson said, it's not it's our power that we're afraid of. And so the more we embrace the power that we are, the cultures that we're in will change to fully embrace the power that the culture can be.
mm. Before you go on, you said it's our power that we are afraid of. Say more about that.
Well, the quote speaks to us thinking that we're shrinking makes it possible for anything to happen, and shrinking doesn't help anyone. It's when we step into that power, it's when we step into our capacity, our
Mm,
gifts, our
mm,
talents, our contributions, that enables us to fully contribute.
mm.
And unless we are fully contributing, the entire culture suffers. And so
Yeah,
what I look at
yeah.
the world today, and it's like the entire culture is suffering for a lack of full expression of the human spirit.
Mm,
But we're afraid of that full
yeah.
expression because it's not controllable. Hence we can create governments and systems and all these things that try to narrow us down into usable, capitalizable, exploitable human resources.
Mm,
It's not a thing.
yeah.
That's not what we were designed to be.
You're bringing up something else, and this may come across as so basic, but because of everything that I'm hearing you say. So, what is culture?
Oh, culture is the agreed upon behaviors in a nutshell. Culture is agreed upon behaviors. And as long as we're agreeing to the behaviors of a particular culture, that will be the culture. I bet if everybody left X right now, the culture would disappear, right? If most folks just moved out of the United States right now and decided to become immigrants somewhere else, where would the culture of the United States be? What would it be made of? We are the culture. And how we
So,
show up creates the culture, what's acceptable and what's not, what we allow and what we don't. We are
yeah,
that culture.
yeah. So, okay, so culture, certain things we
Phil's
can
gonna kick
allow,
our ass, just
certain
so you
things,
know.
huh?
Phil's gonna kick our ass, just to point it out.
Okay, so agreed upon. And I just want to quickly dabble here before we go into the close out. Agreed upon cultures, how behaviors. However, there are certain times when we do have freedom to make a choice, even though it's a hard choice. But
Oh, we
making that
always have the
choice
choice though.
takes
Yeah.
us may take us almost feel like we are in retrogression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that's because we've agreed so long that the culture thinks that that's identity.
Yeah. Mhm.
The culture thinks it's identified as the
Mhm.
culture. The culture is fluid. The
Mhm.
culture can change. The culture grows. The culture adapts. We're not going to make a culture into a constitution.
Yeah.
That's how institutionalization takes place. Culture is dynamic. It's alive. Culture
Yeah.
is like the
Yeah.
earth, it's
Hey,
Gaia.
culture is in yogurt, and you know good how healthy your culture is in yogurt.
Yes.
Okay, so talking about that, what is, how do we own our space? How do we not shrink, whether we in culture, whether we in family, whether in workplaces, whether in relationships? I mean, there's just so many different places of society that we plugged in. How do we own our space and not shrink?
Well,
Big question, right?
I think the first thing that you need to address in terms of owning your space is, who are you?
Mm,
Because I think we have a deficit of identity. And hear me out here, and I hope I'm not elongating too much here, but I think the idea of identity has been misused in our society. We've created external identities based on certain features and qualities and behaviors and sexual orientations and skin tones and all these things that are not truly identity. They're projections of our identity.
mhm,
Who are we at our core? And if we really understand who we are at our core, there won't be any insecurities to defend with some external identity. I am. I am. And because I am, you're going to hear me.
mm.
Because what I am is I am seeing things that are happening. And if I'm going to see it, I'm going to say it. I am that.
How do you get to a place to say it?
You you have to be able to also purge yourself of all of the I am nots. And that takes time, it takes process, it takes intention. It also is a grieving experience, to be quite honest. Because the moment we start disassociating ourselves from the culture that has made us who we are in search of who we really are, we're going to experience grief because we've actually developed some love for that culture,
Mm,
even though it's killing us, even though it's tearing us down, even though it's telling us who we're not.
mm,
Culture also has a deleterious effect on us if we are not fully who we are.
mm,
And the more we identify with who we are, the more separate we become from the culture. And we
mm.
see it in everything. See it in families. When somebody starts to really differentiate themselves from the family, well, who do you think you are?
Yeah. Mm,
Right?
yeah.
That's the identity thing starting to erode.
Mm,
Well, in a real family, in a real loving context, that identity is fluid. I
mm,
see you, not the son that I had. I see you at 27, not the son that I had at 6. And if I keep my son at 27 locked into who I thought he was when he was 6 years old, I'm not letting him be who he is.
mm.
So it
Yeah.
takes a liberation of yourself to
Mhm.
willingly divest from those identities so that you can really identify who you are all by yourself.
Mm. You know, right now, Jethro is on his first business trip, and so he's away, and I'm expecting to hear from him. It's his first business trip, Wants to. I texted to check in, no response, and I'm like, well, doesn't he care? Doesn't he know that I'm concerned? Doesn't he know this? And I had to hold myself back and say, let him be. Let him, if he makes a choice not to reach out, let him be.
Mm,
Let him be right there without judgment. I need to love him as so much that I can let him be.
yeah,
It's killing me inside, but I feel I can only be me if I let him be him.
that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
And it's not easy.
And the
It's not
grieving
easy.
goes both ways.
It hurts,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
given time, it's something that I need to accept little by little. It's tough. And that's comes back to culture of family,
Yeah.
and what it is of a parent and a child. Even that,
Hmm.
what society expects, what we expect, or even just what I expect from. I have an expectation, and he's like, "No, mom, I'm not meeting that expectation. I'm
Right.
doing my own thing. You're
Hmm.
gonna have to trust me. You're gonna have to trust the man that you brought up."
Yep.
You know.
Trust your
So in
work.
closing,
Hmm.
yeah. So
Hmm.
in closing, if you could go back and tell your younger self one thing about taking up space, what would that be?
Play bigger.
Play bigger.
Simple. Play bigger.
Mhm.
Practice playing bigger. It starts at a young age. The fawning starts at a young age. Practice playing bigger.
And if this was something you were saying to somebody whoever's listening out there, and the question to you would be, how do I practice playing bigger?
Well, honestly, if I were to tell my young self, my 8-year-old self, play bigger, and I spoke back and said, "Well, how am I supposed to do that?" I, I'd say literally, play like you're bigger. Play like you're bigger than you think you are. Pretend you're the Hulk. Show up like that. Be unafraid to tear up some things. You might get in trouble. You will get in trouble on a lot of levels, but play bigger.
Yeah.
Look for ways to play bigger than you think you are.
Yeah, yeah. That's really powerful. And in closing, I just spoke at an event with really top people on this large stage, and I am just this 5 foot. You know how short I am, right? 5 foot, and I had to go up there and I had to say to them that one of the reasons why I'm confident, because that's what I was talking about, right? One
Hmm.
of the reasons why I can do what I'm doing is because I had to, in my private space, see myself as bigger, see
Hmm.
myself as bigger than the stage.
Yeah.
Then only I could come on the stage and own it and dominate. I can only dominate the stage if the stage is smaller than me.
Hmm.
And that's how that was a story that I shared. That I just shared that yesterday.
I love it.
Anyway, wow, what a powerful conversation, KJ. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your insights, your experiences. You and I love talking. We can go on and on. You know that. But before I wrap up, let me leave you all with this here. Practice playing bigger. Practice playing bigger. Play like you're bigger than you think you are. So, KJ, thank you. I'm excited that you're going to be on our podcast next week. Pay attention, everyone, to when you start to shrink. Where does it happen the most? Whether it's at work, relationships, or even with yourself. The first step is to reclaim your space, noticing when you give it away, and start to play bigger. Next time, we're talking about the people who make us shrink, bullies, manipulators, and hidden insecurities behind their behaviors. It's going to be a deep one, so make sure you tune in. KJ is going to be with us again, and we have a great lineup of amazing coaches on our panel. So until next time, my friends, take your space. See you next.